In today's tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to draft a basic collar pattern. Hi friends, welcome back to So Obvious. I'm Polner. I don't really have an intro or story about collars. I mean, you know what collars are, you know what they're there for, you know what kind of garments you use them for. So let's just get started. The first thing we have to do to get our collar started is we have to measure our necklines both on the front of our bodice and on the back. I'm using the patterns that we created weeks ago for my mannequin. When measuring, you want to make sure that you're measuring the line that you'll actually see once sewn, because this outside line here is actually the seam allowance, and if you do that, it'll give you the wrong measurement. Front neckline is about 3 3/4 of an inch. And our back neckline is about 4 inches. Now that we have our measurements, we can add them up, and we know that our half neckline is going to be 7 3/4 inches. We're going to use our ruler to create a straight line that is 7 3/4 inches long. Here's our line. I switched over to markers so you guys can see this a lot easier. Our back and our front neckline are different. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from here, measure 4 inches, which is our back neckline. We're going to make a notch there. So when we finish drafting this pattern, this end here is the back. This is going to be the front. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a rectangle using these measurements. Most collars are about 1.5 inches. So from this line, I'm going to go up 1.5 inches on both sides, and then connect the top to create a rectangle. That's the base for our collar. Now, because our necklines, as you can see here, the necklines are very, very curved. When you try to sew a straight line to a curved line, it's going to create puckers, it's going to create gathers. So we need to create some sort of ease here so that it will bend with the curved line of the collar. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to this end, which is the front. We're going to make a notch about 1/2 inch higher, right there. And now we're going to use our curved ruler to connect this notch to this notch over here in a curved line. Now, if you don't have a curved ruler, that's okay. I mean, the curve itself isn't super crazy, so you can probably freehand it. Just make sure that this straight line here blends perfectly into this curved line here. Now that we have this curved line here, this kind of makes it look a little wonky up here. So we want to make sure that we continue this line moving up as well. So what I do is I go about 1/8 of an inch here, and then I create a line from this notch through this notch, making sure it goes up 1.5 inches straight. So we knot right there, 1.5 inches is up here. There we go. Now this corner, we have to make sure we blend it into this line as well. This is our collar right there. Now we have a choice to make. Do we want our collar to be rectangle like that? Or do we want to maybe curve it out right here to make it look nice and round like a mandarin collar? Or what you can also do is, if you want to make this out bigger and then blend it in so that it's more dramatic, or it just goes with whatever style you're trying to do. Just for this tutorial, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to round out the corner and make it into a mandarin collar. So now this curved part is our collar. Now we can go ahead and cut it out. So this is the pattern piece we end up with for our collar. Now all we have to do is add in our seam allowances. So what we do is we're going to lay this down. We're going to outline it with our pencil or pen, making sure to transfer any notches we have. We need this notch here. This notch, when we sew our two pieces together, that notch is going to land right there at the seam line. So now that we got it outlined, we can add our seam allowances. Most people usually do about 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance. I always do a 1/2 inch so I can sew it without a problem, and then I just trim off the excess. But for the purpose of the tutorial, we will do a 1/4. Here we have our seam allowance added. Now, what you do back here depends on what kind of garment you're making. If the garment you're making has an opening in the back, then you would add a 1/4 inch seam allowance back here. If the garment you're making is like a button-down shirt that has the buttons in the front, then you would make this something you cut on the fold. The garment that we designed actually has an opening in the back, so I'm going to put a 1/4 inch seam allowance down the center back. And that is our pattern for a basic collar. Now you make sure that you label it basic collar. We always cut 2 of the self, which means the outside fabric, and you also want to cut 2 of the interfacing. Interfacing is very important for things like collars and cuffs because it makes them stay nice and pointy. It makes them stay nice and stiff. You don't want your collars to kind of get all loose and falling on you. So once you cut this out, then you're good to go. Here we have our pattern piece. It's important to notice that you can make this pattern piece bigger. For example, if you want a pattern piece where there's actually a button at the end of your collar, then what you would do is, once you have the original block made, then you would add 1 inch or 1.5 inch or however much space you need to accommodate that button, which means that this part would actually be a little bit longer, coming out to about here. And then you'd want to make sure that there is a notch right here, signaling where the actual collar ends and where the overlap for the button begins. So let's say that you are making a collar for a dress shirt. As you guys know, dress shirts usually have some sort of collar stand. Here is a collar for a dress shirt that I made myself months ago. Here we have the collar stand. The collar stand is really just a smaller version of the basic collar. Instead of doing 1.5 inch height, you do about 1 inch. Then you use that piece to create another collar, but this time has a lot more drastic point on the end. So let's do that. So we're going to pretend that this piece is actually 1 inch, not 1.5 inches. Therefore, it is a collar stand, not a basic collar. Now that we have it, we're going to use this to create the basis for our next piece, making sure that we put our notches. Now for all my collars, I'm a big and tall guy, which means that my clothes need to be bigger. I always do about 2 inches for the length of my collars. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep those 2 inches going all the way across. Now here is where you get to kind of decide where you want your collar to be. If you want it to be super drastic, you can angle it out or angle it up as sharp as you want. If you're doing this for a coat, obviously you'd probably do a little bit more dramatic. But just for this episode, or for this video, we'll do here. Then what you're going to want to do is, just like the other one, blend it into this line, which means that this little line here no longer exists. So this is our collar, which would go directly on top of this piece. You want to make sure that you also keep this notch to make sure that these are matching. So all you gotta do now is do your 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch seam allowance, cut it out, and we are ready to go. If you like today's video, make sure that you like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. You can also follow me on Instagram on @OnHollyLook. There, I post some of my upcoming projects and any other videos that I'll be posting on here. If you didn't like today's video, then I recommend that you go to bed and take a nap, because clearly you are very tired and delusional. Okay, bye.